Well, hello everyone, and welcome in to another rockin' awesome Saturday night. We've been doing this now for 18 years, and we got a wonderful program that's coming on here tonight. You don't want to miss it. If you miss this program tonight, you're going to miss a lot. This is going to be a dynamite program. Of course, the program is called Watchtower Insider Tells All. Of course, that's Barbara Anderson, and she has a woman coming on here. Her name is Shannon Dominguez. And she was on a program a month or so ago in Spanish. She's bilingual, so she's going to tell her story tonight in English if you missed her broadcast on Ephraim's program Oasis. So we're looking forward to the program tonight. Let me bring Barbara on first and say hello to Barbara. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Rick. Nice to be here.
Well, good to see you. Boy, you got the energy lately, I'll tell you. I don't know where you're getting it, Barbara. You're doing wonderful. Now, we have a guest. I'm going to bring the guest on. You can introduce her, and I'll kind of step out of here and let you guys go at it. So let's bring on the guest. Tell us who this is.
Well, this is Shannon Dominguez, as you said. And actually, I'm seeing Shannon for the first time. And I've spoken to her on the phone, but we didn't have a lengthy discussion. And so I'm going to hear some new things tonight, too. When she was interviewed, when Shannon, I heard all about what a interesting interview that Ephraim had with you in Spanish. I figured that those who didn't hear it or didn't know Spanish would be interested in what you have to say. I asked you to send me some notes about your life, which you did. And I have to say, reading about your life, I'm a parent. I raised a son. And so I kind of know how kids do. And I was a kid once, a long time ago. And I know that when you're a kid, it seems like it's all about obedience. And we never did anything right when we were kids. And so we were scolded. Okay. Well, a witness kid, which I wasn't, because I converted to the witnesses when I was 14. So I had a very ordinary, sort of worldly childhood, celebrating the holidays. And we were in an unusual family, just an ordinary family, good family though. And your life is very complicated, wasn't it?
It was.
Yes. And what stood out to me was the word abuse. I didn't go through that. I wasn't abused. Sometimes I was scolded, and yes, I was spanked because my parents were strict. And I was spanked, but not beaten. And I thought I was mistreated because they spanked me. But you, apparently, what was happening to you never happened to me. So I thought that a little bit about this. And before I ask you any questions, I want to tell you and the audience how I feel about. I've talked to an awful lot of people. I do every day. And so many of the ex-witness community have come to the same conclusion that I have, but I came to this conclusion quite a while ago. You know, ex-witnesses, many of them don't want to call Jehovah's Witnesses a cult. Do you?
Oh, I 100% call them a cult.
Yes. Okay. But many don't. They don't want that. That's a abusive word, right? Almost. But, cults, there's a criteria set for what a cult is. And so many of the ex-witnesses don't feel that the witnesses meet up to that criteria. Well, we're not going to go into that completely. Just a little bit. A cult is one that the leaders are fixated on their movement. Is that true? Yes. And they want those who become members of that group. Of course, they don't call themselves a cult, but they meet the criterion of a cult. If you objectively take a good look at it. But in one area, they can be very abusive when you do not obey the leaders. Isn't that true? There's been a large articles on Fiji recently, and a South Korean group moved into Fiji, and they certainly, in the headlines of the article, were called a cult. They brought a tremendous mess to Fiji, and they were thrown out, and many were arrested, and it was a big mess. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses don't have anything like that. But they are, in one aspect, fixated on the religion. And if you do not obey the religion or what's required of you by the religion, then you're punished. And in this aspect, that's cult-like. And the issue, of course, we're talking about and going to talk about two kinds of abuse, or maybe more. In your case, there was, what was the most outstanding abuse, if they can possibly be called outstanding?
My personal experience, or with?
Yes, your personal experience. Which aspect of this disobedience or this abuse by leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses, and also in your personal life, what aspect do you feel stands out to you the most? Because you have abused in more than one way.
Yes. So my personal belief of where I've come to believe is that the Jehovah's Witnesses set an environment for abusive people or people with abusive tendencies to run rampant. So my father had abusive tendencies combined with the headship arrangement. He was really armored to come down hard on us. I don't think that every Jehovah's Witness elder necessarily does that. But for me, that's the experience that I had with my father. And then I went and married a man who was a Jehovah's Witness who also, surprise, had abusive tendencies. And the thing with the witnesses that hurt me the most is that no matter how many times I went to the elders, no one ever took my side. Even when I came with evidence, when I had done research on what mental abuse and emotional abuse, what these things looked like, and brought them to the elders in hopes that they would allow me to escape an abusive marriage. And they took all that research and they pushed it aside, and they said, this is worldly knowledge. We need to turn to the Bible, and what the Bible says is what God has yoked together, may no man tear apart. So for me, I see a lot of people being trapped in very abusive situations, and elders are only spitting scriptures when these people need counseling and therapy, and they need someone to come beside them and help them to get out of these abusive situations.
Yes. In your few-minute answer there, you covered a lot of ground. And that's good. Because really, with children, which can turn into abuse, there's a scripture quoted about how to raise children. And people who are not witnesses, they all know that one. Spare the rod, spoil the child, you spank the child. A lot of people disagree with that too, but that can lead to abuse. Well, in Jehovah's Witnesses, everything about the religion has to do with obedience. So it can lead to an abusive situation. So within the family, well, when you say obedience, if you're not obedient to your parents, so you expect to be punished. So they take away your TV or your cell phone or something, not necessarily hit you, but that's okay in Jehovah's Witnesses religion, although not all of Jehovah's Witnesses agree with that. I do know that for certainty because I've known some elders that never, and their wives, they've never spanked their kids because that was not part of their culture. See, so you have cultural ideas here too, don't we?
Exactly.
And in your case, it was a Spanish culture that you became part of, although you're not even Spanish, right?
That's correct. And I think it's important to really point out that I grew up with a father who was an elder for a time and had abusive tendencies, and then married someone who was very similar. And when I talk about, or when I think about the abuse that I suffered when I was a child, I think you've mentioned spanking. I do think there's a difference in spanking and being beaten. And being beaten is when your legs from your ankles to your buttocks are welted, or maybe you got beat with a switch and they're bleeding. Maybe you got, for me, those are things that happened to me. I got a black eye. And the why behind it is that I was not respectful and obedient. And it's important to note with the Jehovah's Witnesses that simply asking questions can be viewed as disrespectful. If my dad is in the family meeting, family worship, and he's leading that, and I ask questions that seem disrespectful or uncooperative, I remember being taken downstairs and beaten over and over to where I was screaming to my mom, please call 911. Like I wasn't sure what my legs were going to look like after that. And that is tolerated. No one comes to rescue you when you're in that.
That's right. And that's what I was going to say next. So in this group, that demonstrates a cult-like feature of absolute obedience or punishment. The powers that be in it will support the abuser. They don't mean to. No, we're talking about physical abuse here. So they will not entirely listen to the child. Now, if there is tremendous obvious features of the abuse where you, as you said, with the welts on your legs, many elders don't like that. So they'll counsel the parent that does that.
But only if they know. So me as a child, I didn't know that the treatment I was receiving was wrong. Okay. I thought that I deserved it because I was disobedient and I was headstrong and I wasn't submissive enough.
You got it. Because the whole religion is built around obedience. And actually, if many people who are listening to this are quite religious, they've left the Witnesses, but they've perhaps joined another religion, or as an individual, they still worship. And they're acquainted with the so-called New Testament or the Greek scriptures. And there, what is most people agree, what is the paramount thing that is stressed by the man in that Greek scriptures? What was that one thing stressed?
I mean, that they're the head of the house?
Well, not necessarily. Okay. I didn't mean to get you off that. What I was looking for was love.
Oh, gotcha.
You see, love. And so the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, since I was in it for 43 years and I raised a son in it, talks a lot about love. It's talk the talk. do they really care? Do the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses care about their congregants? Remember, we're not going to use the word member because they're not using that anymore. They have no members, okay, but they have congregants, so we're going to use that. So do they really care about them? They say they do, but I've spoken to so many people who have come to that conclusion themselves, as I have. When you really examine it, they don't really care about the people. They care about the organization more than they do about the people. And this has caused their congregants to be the same way towards their own family, right? The organization comes first. The husband feels that way about his wife. The wife feels about that way about her husband too. She wants him to measure up to what the organization says a husband should be. And here we have personalities, cultures. We have all of this subjective world. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has their own genetic makeup, and but that's not really permissible in Jehovah's Witnesses and other religions like Jehovah's Witnesses. And of course, the Catholic Church at one time would be a very tough religion to be into, but they learned over centuries that it doesn't work. And so they stay out of people's personal affairs, but not Jehovah's Witnesses. And of course, what has really brought all of this attention to Jehovah's Witnesses, where even the non-Jehovah's Witness world is looking at Jehovah's Witnesses, and it is over another form of abuse. And you know what that one is. The child abuse, the child sexual abuse. But we're not going to talk primarily, we're not going to really go into that here. Is that true?
Yeah, I never experienced any sexual abuse when I was inside of the witnesses. We did have an elder in our congregation who went to prison. That was a really disruptive time. He seemed like a really good elder, but he had been doing things that he shouldn't have done. I don't know a lot of details about that. It happened when I was probably 12 or 13. And all the situations that I've heard, whether it's child abuse or, marital rape or physical abuse or emotional abuse, what I've seen is that the Jehovah's Witnesses just give you the best fertile environment for abusive people. They draw them in. The way you witness, the way you prey on vulnerable people. And I feel like the tendency is a combination of very domineering, unhealthy individuals who have a plethora of vulnerable individuals that they are allowed to prey on in ways that they are not held accountable.
Well, what we use a word for the ones we attract into the organization. Dysfunctional.
Yes.
We attract dysfunctional people. So, and they have more needs. They don't fulfill their own needs. They want others to fill their needs. And their needs could be extremely difficult to fill because they come from dysfunctional homes, and perhaps they were beaten or raised with sexual abuse or other types of abuse. So you're bringing in strangers into organization who have come from all walks of life, and then you're making demands on them to meet the criteria of a religion that has very set dogma. They have family dogma, right? They make it almost a religious thing on our personal affairs, how we manage our financial affairs, and magazines cover that, right? They cover everything. There's dogma for everything, and they turn it into something like pleasing God, You please God.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would love to share a story that contextualizes that,
Great.
I believe.
Right.
So I am 21 years old. I married someone. This is when I was 21. I had married someone who I dated for 2 months. I believed that our makeout sessions, we did not have intercourse or oral sex, but I believed that our makeout sessions were unclean. So I just married him because I thought that that would be better than having to be disfellowshipped. So I rushed into a marriage. Come to find out, I'm with a very unhealthy, abusive person. And I ended up separating from them for 1 month. And I would not talk to the elders. Like I said, I'm about 21 years old. And when the elders finally meet with me and him, 1 month after he's been kicked out, they sit down and I bring all of that evidence that I found. I felt so not crazy for once in my life. I could prove what was happening to me, because mental, emotional, and psychological abuse can really make the victims feel like they don't know up from down.
Yes.
And the elders told me, God is yoked together, may no man take apart, that I needed to pray more, meditate on God's word more, read his word more, preach more, be more submissive. And I remember being so angry because this meeting, I thought that I provided all of the evidence where I could escape in a marriage that was making me feel like I would rather not be alive. And I remember being so angry at the end of it that I just stood up and I yelled at the elders something along the lines of, okay, so you're telling me that in order to be right with God, to be good with Jehovah, that I have to stay in a marriage that makes me want to kill myself? And they were like, yes. And I said, well, then if I ever kill myself, you should consider yourself responsible. And that was it. Like, I really, really wanted to be good with Jehovah. I wanted to do things the right way. I wanted to do what God wanted me to. And if God wanted me to stay in an abusive marriage, then I guess that was what I was going to have to do. But to think that people could be fighting tooth and nail to get out of an abusive situation, there is no way out. I mean, unless you're being, unless you've got bruises and battered, but there's so much abuse that happens that isn't always so obvious.
Well, sometimes you can show the bruises, and the bruised person is told, you caused it. You must have caused it. You said something, and turn this right around and made the victim and re-victimize one again. But that's because of the whole objective of the religion is built like this, on guilt. It's guilt. And you never do enough of anything right. That God is so harsh on you. And so this doesn't work. And that's why the divorce rate in Jehovah's Witnesses, when I was at headquarters, I was told it was equal to the world. But I understand now Jehovah's Witnesses divorce rate is higher than the world.
Wow.
So the culture we live in, the religion doesn't fit either, you see, because of the women's attitudes. So they want you to get out of the culture, which you can't. It's all around you, and bend to a culture that is thousands of years old. And every generation brings with it change. We know that because even the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, each administration under a different president and so forth, brought in a different culture. But the basic culture is a biblical one and can go back as far as 3,500 years with the Israelites in Mount Sinai. And all of that is explained in those words. Don't fit us, but they try to make it fit. So there again is a problem. So not saying that all of Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs are bad, or the people are all bad. Nobody's saying that. It is a culture, though, that doesn't provide and fill the needs of a world that we live in today. So that would make you think that God changes all the time too. He wants you to change. You don't know where you belong. And then when people who come into this organization are very dysfunctional, they think it's because they're love bombed in the beginning, right? So they think it's a perfect organization. And they try to squeeze their behind closed doors activities into this organization that they think is perfect. So that makes them feel even more guilty. And it goes round and round and round.
And I listened to a podcast recently because since I've been out, when I left the witnesses, I had never heard or read any apostate material for years. I was not a witness. I would never go back to being a witness. And I was also never exposed to apostate material. Those were conclusions that I had drawn on my own. So in the past, like recently, in the past year, I've started to learn more. And I've started to realize there was this one podcast called Surviving Paradise. And they have an episode that blew my mind because they talked about how the Jehovah's Witnesses are systematically designed to erode away at a person's sense of self and then put them in a catatonic state and reprogram them. And that's now I can't unsee it. And that's why I'm sharing my story and speaking up about it more, because I realize this isn't just a religion like you can, choose to be Catholic or Baptist or Mormon. There are definitely similarities with the Mormons, but nonetheless, they're really eroding away at your sense of self. And that's why when I think back, I feel like I saw so many people who are suffering from depression and anxiety, and myself included. And it makes so much sense now.
Oh, I was amazed to find out when I was at Bethel, it was told to me that one of the biggest problems in the congregations, this is a long time ago, because I left there in 92, and was depression. Why would the happiest people who have the truth have so much depression? And they knew that in the department, service department, right, and in the writing department, they knew that depression was a huge problem, and because the circuit overseers report all that in. So, do we want to change this religion? Is that what we're speaking out? Personally, I want to, and I did, leave the religion. Leave it to those that like it. It fits what they want in a religion, and there's freedom of religion. But we have the issues we can't get out of the religion. We carry such baggage with it, what you said, psychologically. Some of us never get over that. And we pass it on to our children. We've raised our children in a religion, and our children have psychological issues. Now I'm going to back up now. We laid a foundation here for our listeners, and we laid it for each other too. So, because I've never had a really deep conversation with you, and you don't really know me, so either. So let's back up and see a lot about this whole situation. I was curious. Tell us, the audience, when you were born.
I was born in 1988.
Okay. Oh, by 1988, I was quite up in age. I was at Bethel in 1988, and I was getting ready to go into the writing department, where I learned the real truths about the religion I was in, but I still did not understand how it didn't fit with what they were saying, with the truth and the actual practice of the religion, it was two different things. The magazines painted this marvelous picture of a brotherhood, and of course, all the expectations, the counting of years to when it was going to be over. Okay, nothing fit. Now let's see how you fit in it. Okay, your parents became witnesses when you were 3 years old, and apparently all your close relatives converted. Yeah, so that was interesting. They must have really all be very attracted to the message. What was the message that they were attracted to?
Well, they had been exposed to witness teachings at some point in their lives. My mother said she remembered being taught that God's name was Jehovah, and that always stuck with her. And so when the witnesses came in, I think the message that was most attractive to my family was have a happy family life. I had grandparents, I had an aunt and uncle, I had my parents, me and my brother. And I think that my family could see to a certain extent their own dysfunction, and the witnesses brought a hope for a better life. And I think they genuinely wanted to create a better life for me and my younger brother.
Yes. That's a story that's repeated over and over again because it just sounds so idyllic, when you're sitting with the witnesses, that everything is so wonderful and so perfect, and not that we, I don't know. I don't want to make too much out of that because there were plenty of witnesses I knew that had good lives, good family lives too, and they were good people. In every different way. So, and many of them are still witnesses, and many of them have left. So, see, there's a change there of our needs. Why does this happen? Well, we could invite a psychologist on here, and you and me can ask all kinds of questions, but we won't. Now, I was interested in this. Your father was an elder he became an elder around 96. So you're approximately 8 years old. And then you say when you were 9, you were beaten with a belt. Did he do things like this before he became an elder?
Yes, he did. And I think that his mentality at the time, first of all, I think he had the climate of, abusive tendencies and a lot of unhealed trauma that he brought to the table. But I think that the standing of an elder and wanting to do things right, I mean, we're kind of taught to beat our children in line. Yes. Beat obedience into them. And no one knew about it necessarily at the congregation. I'm sure people heard very unhealthy remarks that my father would make to us, but no one ever said anything. It was tolerated. It's an environment where you can be like that and no one holds you accountable. No one questioned it. It just was what it was. To me, it was very normal. And I assumed that all the other children were probably being beaten behind closed doors too, if they were as rebellious as I was.
And as an elder, he wouldn't be very sympathetic, would he, when he would be in a meeting and a young person complained about physical abuse by their parent, because he's already has this inclination himself. So he's not going to all of a sudden turn into this man who doesn't believe in corporal punishment. So his opinions are still there. And that's why, one of my sayings, everybody knows, I say it all the time, that beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. Is how you look at things. You don't really change. Some ways, yes. If we're adults, we understand that there's plenty of room to make yourself a better person. But overall, you're still stressed out with things that you don't talk about to others that that are wrong or this or that. We're just humans. We all say that we're just humans. But as an elder, this is a problem in this group because they appoint men to positions and give them rules and expect these people to be different, entirely different. It doesn't work. That's why you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. So here we have this issue of physical abuse. And as you mentioned, you had a black eye, but you said you got that from your mother.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
And, I look at myself as a child and I see that I was suffering a lot of religious trauma, a lot of emotional and mental trauma. And I don't know what exactly happened between me and my mother when I received that black eye, but I do remember that my understanding of the situation is that it was my fault. And if I wasn't the way that I was, then they wouldn't have to be that way with me.
Yes.
And that was such a difficult experience because my entire experience being a Jehovah's Witness was just trying to be the way that I was supposed to be. Yes. And never being able to be that and never understanding why I wasn't good enough to be that. Now I realize that I am an outspoken, critically thinking, intelligent human who deserves to ask questions without reaping repercussions or being defined in the ways that I was categorized as.
Well, you are who you are. And just because you're in a religion or any group with other groups, you go to a university and you're being taught things that maybe you don't appreciate, and you don't take up perhaps your professor's ideology either. I mean, that leaks through when you're being instructed. I want to know, how about your three when they become witnesses? Your last birthday and Christmas was your small child. How did you feel about being a witness in your young years? You're standing up disobediently. They consider it disobedience. Somebody outside the religion wouldn't think of disobedience when a kid is mouthy, because you expect kids to be mouthy. There's more forgiveness, generally speaking, for kids, but that's not in the strict religion. They're not treated as kids.
You don't get the same developmental milestones.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So did this pressure, you didn't even probably understand it was pressure on you when you were in school. You were different. You're always different. This is what we all say about that children who grow up in the organization remark about how they were different. Some of them hated it. Now, I loved it. I converted at 14, and I loved being different because I didn't realize then, but I do now, because when I was 14, I wanted to be different, and that's the ages everybody wants to be different, and kids are striking out and being opposite, and then they're getting in trouble with their parents at that age. So here you are, you're psychologically hungry for other things, and you're being molded in a different direction.
And this is something I would like to share here, because when I say that I was disrespectful, I think it's really important to understand what the circumstances were. I was a very good child in a lot of ways. I never did drugs. I never drank. I never smoked. I wanted to obey the rules. But where my disrespect would show is that 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, I'm being forced to sit through meetings every Tuesday night, every Thursday night, every Sunday, service on Saturday. And those things I didn't mind, but where I really showed my tail was at family worship. So my dad wanted us to sit down and show him the respect that he deserved as the head of the house, while I was forced to sit through yet another boring, family worship meeting, it was not engaging. It was not fun. It was very demeaning and domineering. And he wanted me to go along with it, and I wouldn't participate, or he'd ask me to answer a question and I would ask a question back that would make his question seem like it was maybe not as intelligent or not as smart. And so he would get very personally offended at that. And he would just be so mad at me that I would not respect his headship arrangement. But respecting his headship arrangement meant disowning my own identity. And so I struggled with that so much.
Yes.
But the result of that type of internal family dynamics actually drew me to the organization. So I found a lot of solace being with the pioneers and being with the elders and being in the congregation. I truly believed everything that I was being taught. It was very normal for me not to go to any holidays, birthdays, and I took pride in who I was. I took pride in being one of Jehovah's people, and I took pride in being different, and I didn't mind if I was made fun of. I was just a very stubborn kid in a lot of ways, and I believed that what I was doing was the right thing. And so where I think a lot of people could have developed trauma around that, I developed a lot of resiliency and a lot of ability to stand my own ground. But it was my home life that was really wreaking havoc for me.
That's interesting. Many of the kids of Jehovah's Witnesses don't react like that. And, one size doesn't fit all. And so they are very resentful of their youth spent made to go out in service in the meetings and whatever.
Oh, I loved it. I had the best times. I traveled to the most incredible places. I met the coolest people.
I did too. I really did. We weren't exposed to a lot of the life like when I became a witness, but I didn't have a childhood as a witness. I had a lot of freedom. But when I became a witness, then I was reaching out towards adulthood anyway. And I'm almost becoming equal to adults who are witnesses. And of course, as a young woman, they treated me fabulously because I wanted the religion. So I got love bombed, and I loved every minute of it. And so in your case, you were dealing with two lives, actually, weren't you? Now, I'm not playing a psychologist here. This is just ordinary thinking and hearing and listening to people for years that I've done. And really, we're generally speaking, people want to be a perfect witness, or they don't want to be a perfect witness. They want either in or out. And the way the witnesses are set up is one size fits all. And the writers do try in the literature to make things seem like they really aren't. They make them seem everybody's better because of being a witness. So brotherhood is better. Now, these are issues, we don't want to go off on a tangent here, but yours is a life of, it was difficult when I read all of this, because no one should have to live like this. No, not for real. You're a candidate later on in your life to lay on a psychiatrist's couch.
Oh, I have. That's only why I'm here and able to. I've had to work through a lot of things. I went from, an abusive childhood where I was a golden child at the meetings, and I felt like I was a bad kid at home. So I never knew if I was good or bad. Yeah. I have deep-seated doubt and self-esteem issues from that. And then when I was at the peak of my pioneering, and I'm 18 and I'm being asked to speak on the district conventions, I get pioneer school taken away because I went 100 miles an hour in a car. Not for a long time. I just tapped it. It was a brand new car. I was excited. It bothered someone's conscience in the congregation. And because I was an example, I needed to be made an example of. So 2 weeks before pioneer school, I was crushed. I lost Pioneer School. I wasn't publicly reproved. I was marked, and I was not viewed as spiritual anymore. And that's when I felt vulnerable to my ex-husband. Got
Yes.
married very quickly,
Yes.
and then went right into more abuse, where I ended up losing control of my finances. I wasn't allowed to have a job. I was taught that his needs sexually should be met every day unless I'm on my period. And then if I ever need to skip a day, that's fine. I can make up twice the next day. And I never knew how wrong that was. I knew how wrong it felt. And I went to the elders over and over, but I was never allowed to leave. That was the only life that I'd made a decision, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And I had to sleep in a bed of consequences that for me led me to feel very depressed and very anxious a lot of the time.
See, you're not alone. In the future, I hope to have information on this topic. I won't have anybody to interview, or maybe I will, but you're fitting the criterion of what I want to talk about, because my husband and I went to an assembly, and when we were at Bethel, our son was engaged to a gal, and we met. We went to Indiana where her parents lived, and we went to that convention, that summer convention with them. So the two families were becoming united. And in the car on the way, of course, the mother of my daughter-in-law, at the time, of course, the girl was like a stranger to me anyway, but the mother near my age and so forth, she realized I was in the writing department. She had a real issue that she wanted to bring up to me. And I had that a lot after I was in writing, where women approached me about problems. And she told me a circumstance, and I'm going to tell the audience, spend an hour or two on what happened then. And it was so extraordinary. And it wasn't her personal life. She had a good life. Her husband was a wonderful man. And he was an elder. And but it was a Bible study that she had, who converted and became a witness. And what happened at that afterwards, it was absolutely awful. And so when I went back to Bethel, we went back after the convention. So I walked into I knocked at the door of the Awake editor, because I was at that time working with some of the things that he needed of me. I was doing the Proclaimers book, but I also was helping out with something else. And there was a senior writer in his office, and they were talking. So when I came in the door to the office, I stood in, and so we chatted a while, and then I could see both these men were married men. They were married for years. They were older fellows, and they loved their wives. And I decided to tell them about this experience, and so they were appalled. And that was what happened. Is the Awake editor assigned the writer to write an article on women, and that ended up in the Awake as Respect for Women. And but what I can talk about getting to that point and talk, and this very special man, that he was English, and they brought him in to be part of the writing department from England, and he never had seen anything like this. I don't know why he never thought about it. I guess many of the men don't. So he was assigned the article, and I was assigned to work with him on this. And he went out with a tape recorder, and he talked to women at Bethel. What a story. He was shocked. So you see what we're talking about here with and your issues here. This is played out over and over again. And if yours was an exception to the rule, I wouldn't have heard this over and over again all these years. So that could they improve it? Could be. They could be, but it's too late for people like me, and probably for you. Of course, I'm not being judgmental here. And so the point is that the results have been bad. They have not been good for the community of Jehovah's Witnesses. It all sounds good, but in the reality, it is not good. And in fact, to show you how much lack of love this organization has for its congregants, there's a situation in New Zealand right now. You're probably aware of the investigation into child abuse by the government in New Zealand. And WATCHTOWER doesn't want to be any part of it. And they're claiming that they don't have any programs for children. They never deal with children. So they shouldn't be included in religion, how religion deals with child abuse, because they don't have any of these problems. They have no programs for children. Well, we know better. We know the reason they got out of the ministry school was so they could say that they didn't have a program that didn't involve children. And so, you know, the reality and what they say are two different things. So there are 3 articles already that have come out in New Zealand. A very interesting reading, and everybody should read, of the WATCHTOWERs claiming that they shouldn't be involved in this hearing because they don't have any programs. If there's as child abuse has nothing to do with them, because in these religions, when they have programs that put children together with adults and they're assigned like this, then the religion, they have this idea of agency, and so the members are agents. And so who has to pay in a court case as the religion? And so you don't want to be trying to move away from that so that they don't have to pay in these lawsuits. That's just a little bit of info for our audience to go and look into this. Very, very interesting. But it also proves that the whole religion is built not around its disciples. It's built around the organization. And most people who are out of the witnesses now, they know that. They recognize that. And Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't pander to children. Even when we had the ministry school, one man told me on early in the week when he was assigned on the program to read, you know, when he was a little tot, he had to read Bible reading. And his father would take him to the Kingdom Hall on Tuesday, and they would practice for Thursday. If he didn't get it right, he got a beating. So what does that do to a child's mind, and equate that with religion? Okay, this is your time to talk, and I'm talking too much here, but I'm setting this up because I want people to understand the whole picture. There's more of a picture than they realize, or could realize. And in your case now, you had a run-in with these elders. They were abusive to you, weren't they?
The elders abusive? I would say more dismissive.
Okay, good word. Uh-huh.
I would say they were very dismissive. And I went to the elders dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I was a regular pioneer. I had a good relationship with them. You know, my ex-husband would put me through certain, you know, do certain abusive things. And I would go to them just begging for their help. And it was always the same. You know, they would tell him to be nice and as a head of the house to imitate Christ. But that's pretty much it. And then for me, I just needed to read more and go out.
Yes, well, that's what they all say. Read your Bible more, go to all the meetings, and go out in service. That's the cure-all. That was years ago. They realized that. As time went on, they realized, because I had long talks with these guys in the writing department, and they were realizing, because the letters were coming in, the article on respect for women got the most mail. You can imagine that. And of course, the one on the child abuse, October 8th of 91, had a huge amount of mail. The only other article that ever was in any of the literature that got more was the article in the Awake on animal testing. And then the second one was the Awake article, and the one on...
I remember an article. It wasn't the article that you're referring to. It was about the headship arrangement. And I think it was like heads of house be imitators of Christ, something along those lines. And I remember my ex-husband was asked to read that Watchtower for the meeting. And I was seething inside. I was so angry. It was the most hypocritical thing that I could ever see my ex-husband up on stage reading exactly the opposite, and reading everything he was supposed to be doing as a loving head of Christ, but he would come home and do the opposite, and there's no accountability. There's no, it doesn't mean anything. So you can sit on the stage and you can say, treat your wives with love, be a good head of the house, and then come home and do whatever you want to your wife. And no one will ever hold you accountable. Even if your wife comes to the elders over and over and over again, it's tolerated. It's the perfect environment for abuse to grow.
Well, in years past, that was just part of the situation in many countries. Women had a place, and things changed. But you don't expect that you would have that same situation these days within a religion, and so that discourages people. That's why the religion has always been a revolving door. They come in and go out, and of course that's ended a long time ago. Now it's mostly going out. So your husband was influenced. Now I'm not going to be saying here that the Spanish practice the situation that you went through. Your husband has psychological reasons. If he hadn't been Spanish, he could have been Polish like I am and done the same thing. But at least in Satan's world, when you look at it and you call it that, like in this organization. When they came out with that you go to the elders with crime, and you don't go outside of the organization. And I've spoken on that before, and we know how that came into this organization, and it is what's responsible for the reason that the organization is going under over child abuse. Because when that rule came in, nobody wanted to go to the outside and talk about, the keep quiet, don't bring reproach on Jehovah's organization. So it's not just culturally, it's the situation is individually, the kind of person they are, and then they're told they get away with it in this religion. That's how we hear those words all the time, because the dogma is set up that way, and so it leads into this kind of things. And you mentioned that before. Now, why did you get so involved in Spanish before you met your husband? Because you met him through the Spanish congregation. What need did you have?
So when I was 15, I took 6 weeks of Spanish in 9th grade, and I really enjoyed it. It clicked and it made sense. And by 10th grade, I had decided to homeschool and really lean into Spanish more, because that's where
What did they say? Was all right?
Yeah, they were pretty dismissive of my education. I was, I chose to homeschool. I chose the program. I did the work, and my parents were pretty far removed from.
Okay, but you were smart, so they liked that about you too.
Yeah,
I know they loved you. They
yeah.
just didn't know how to deal with you, and there was no help from the religion. It was just the way it can be. And it's that way even outside. We can't say it's just confined to this religion, but we have to acknowledge that the Mormons are having the similar problems. Because you have so many young people that are on the internet, and they have the same um, these programs, and they're telling all of the problems, and the elders are getting the blame. I mean, you live in a neighborhood where a man is appointed. He's an elder, but he's appointed to look over the whole neighborhood. That block is his. So, I mean, that is personal. And he makes decisions regarding that much intrusion into other lives. And so it isn't working out. And we sound like to many that we were picking on Jehovah's Witnesses. It really is just not working, and it hasn't worked for quite a while. And we touched on why. So Spanish made you very happy. It also gave you you could hold your head up, right? Yeah. Did the Spanish elders, how did they deal with you?
We had once, so we were starting a congregation from the ground up. We had a lot of territory to cover. It was really fun to work on the beginning stages of a congregation. So I loved that. The families really took me in. So I was going to 3 meetings a week in English, and I had a family that would come by and scoop me up for the 3 meetings in Spanish. And, looking back now, it seems just audacious that they would insist that I go on to 6 meetings a week. I had asked to switch to the Spanish, and I was told no. We had a brother who he would tell us stories about hanging out with Toni Morris and Bethel and the type of alcohol they would consume. And it sounded like quite a good time. But he was pretty spiritual, and he was from Texas, and he moved to Virginia to help. I think his understanding was to get our congregation in line. I think we were doing pretty well. He came in with a very heavy hand. And I remember when I was dating my ex-husband, so maybe we had been dating for a month or 6 weeks, probably just a month. I was pioneering. And so my ex-husband, we would spend a lot of time in the ministry. And this brother decided that we were not allowed to go in the ministry together anymore. And when we went into field service, it was always with a car group. There were at least 2 other people with us. But this elder said that we were not allowed to go into the ministry. So together, even if we were in a car group, we were not allowed to be in field service together. And I pushed back really hard. Every single meeting, I asked him which Watchtower or which Awake supported that opinion, because I believe that was his opinion and not a fact. And after maybe the 3rd or 4th time, he said, you know what? You don't listen to me. It's like not listening to Jehovah, and you will reap the consequences. And so I stopped insisting for the Watchtower and Awake. And instead of spending time in the ministry with the person I was dating, we ended up spending time outside of the ministry, which probably contributed to our interactions and getting in trouble for that.
Yeah. Well, here's the situation that most of our listeners, especially if they're older, you can't blame the Watchtower on that, can we? We can't. Because when headquarters learns, as this happens over and over again, for instance, I'll tell you, there was one senior writer, and one of his jobs was if the writing department got 5 letters on the same, complaining on the same subject, then he was to note it, and it would come up at the meeting, the weekly meeting of the writers. And he would also be talking to the service department. If they had 5 or more letters on the same subject, they got their heads together. So that then if circuit overseers or elders called and it was a similar result, they knew there was a problem, so they would try to address it. So they did try, and but you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people who, as we said from the beginning, were all so different. And so the Watchtower wouldn't have approved of what he said to you. The circuit overseer wouldn't. And but the too much control has been an issue with the elders, and that's why they came out with the elders book. It was piecemeal. I have all of the dates and everything where they come out with a brochure for the elders on a certain situation. So every elder got it. Then they took this number of all of them. There wasn't that many that came out every so often. That made the basis of the first elders book. And so they recognized there were problems and that they all needed guidance, and it was said in the book that this represented the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. This was the way this organization wanted to operate, and they wanted their people to operate. The big problem was that people didn't follow those directions. It's human problems. And so you got dealt with like that. But if you got dealt with like that in a number of situations, I mean, if you moved and it happened again, if someone happened, society would have taken note of that if they were alerted to it. But people didn't alert.
Well, of course not. I believe him. Like, I never even thought about writing a letter to
Every women who do what we're told, or we want to be accepted by Jehovah. This is his standard, and so the unhappiness of all of this, the results in your case, you really can't put the blame on anybody. It's a system, isn't it?
Exactly.
Do you want to talk about that?
I mean, I definitely agree. That's one of the biggest points for me, is that they create an environment where people with abusive tendencies are allowed to flourish. And, my father ended up dying by suicide, and he was a witness up until his death. And I think I talked to him the night before, like, I know where his mind was. I know how he was reasoning. But I think one of the biggest things is that the elders step in as counselors when they have no training. And if they're, they have published some articles on encouraging people with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia to get psychiatric help.
Yeah, but it took years for them to allow that. It wouldn't allow it until around 94.
Exactly. And even then, once they publish one article or a couple that say that, it doesn't mean that is what's implemented in congregations.
That's right.
Like, congregations, elders are humans with no training, and they're taking space like they are a counselor or therapist. And it's important because people can lose their lives. And I know that because that's how I lost my father.
Yes.
If the elders had told my father, like, please go seek counseling to deal with these emotions that you're having, he could still be here today. But it was all rooted as well in the elders reinforcing to my father that he had to stay married to his Jehovah's Witness wife at the time. They had been married for 1 year. It was an extremely volatile relationship. They broke fingers, noses, iPads, TVs.
Is that your mother?
That was not my mother. My mother had
divorced, huh?
Yeah, my mother had left him. She got disfellowshipped. My dad fell into a very dark space. I ended up living with him, me and my ex-husband and our daughter when she was very little. And I watched the most beautiful thing happen. I watched my father transform into a different and better person. I watched him hold himself accountable, saying things like, wow, I kind of realize I've really been an asshole and I can be really mean to people. So when I say something that's sarcastic or demeaning, I want you to hold me accountable.
Well,
And I just laughed at him and I said, no way, I am not holding you accountable. And he was like, why not? And I said, because you'll make fun of me. You'll say, oh my goodness, I can't say anything around here. Everyone's so sensitive. And he said, you're right. That is how I normally react. So for my father, the last 3 years of his life, I got to see him transform and change. But when he got married very quickly to another Jehovah's Witness woman for the last year, they triggered each other. They both had unhealed trauma. They both needed to be seeing counselors and therapists, but instead, they ended up having one of the most combustible, violent, abusive interactions. And my dad wanted out so bad. But there was no out. There is no out.
That's right.
There's no out.
The religion played a part in this, which it shouldn't. It shouldn't. And it's disastrous because each of them brought baggage. They brought the baggage from their personal lives, the baggage from their witness lives, and they probably were not compatible, So,
and they needed elders to give them permission to separate. And that was the biggest thing that I went to the elders about was someone has to tell them to separate or someone's going to get hurt. But the elders would never encourage them to separate. And that's just such a dangerous situation. It leaves people with emotional and mental and psychological scars and trauma from the abuse that has to be endured because under rare circumstances are you allowed to leave an abusive partner. It's just not, and then if you do,
it wouldn't have been abusive if they weren't so miserably unhappy with each other. If there's all kinds of dynamics going on, and the Bible doesn't cover it. That's why you have Caesar. That's why you have all the other parts of life, and you pick and choose where you fit. But many people can't do that, and that's why we have crime, murder. We used to have mental institutions. Humans, this is the way it is. Try to make people over with religious dogma works to a certain point. We could talk all day on this. Now, and we all recognize this. I'm not saying anything that's new. If you live long enough, you see it all. And now, why did you? At what point when you were 16 years old, you were homeschooled. You went somewhere in a bikini. What was the dynamic in this? What was playing out here? I want to know.
Oh, that was so funny. So I was homeschooling and there was like a Jehovah's Witness homeschooling co-op and they were at the lake. I was probably about 17. I had my driver's license. I was with 3 other, 17, 18-year-old friends. And I was like, hey, we should, go to this lake, like this homeschooling event. They're going to be there and we should just go hang out. And they were like, okay. So we go to the lake and we have fun and it's great. And we go home. And when I was staying with my friend, she lived about an hour and a half away. I was staying the night at her house and her dad, who is an elder and a raging alcoholic, caused that family extreme trauma and wounds that they live with to this day. But he pulled me into his bedroom and he set me down and he just talked to me about how inappropriate my bathing suit was and how all of our bathing suits, we wore 2 pieces. But what was so confusing to me is that my parents had bought my bathing suit and I wore it on vacation and around them anytime I was in a bathing suit. And all of a sudden I'm being chastised and I'm being told, how do you think that that makes other brothers feel? Like that could make them think sexual about you. And it's better to, I can't remember it exactly, but it's better to like tie a large stone around your neck and jump into the deep sea than to stumble someone, and just talked about how, I had stumbled people and I needed to understand that that wasn't appropriate. And then when I got back to my parents' house the next day, my dad gave me a very similar discussion. It was extremely awkward because I had to have those talks with my friend's father and my father. And I never remember the women saying anything. I'm not even sure that they were in agreement, but their silence spoke consent to what their husbands were saying.
And so here you are at that age, at being a victim again of adults who haven't got their act together.
And how much shame that puts on your body and how much guilt you carry of thinking that you could be the reason for someone else's sinful thoughts, not to mention the disgust. Like I was pretty sheltered. So I showed up to that lake and I had a good time like a 17-year-old kid, and thinking that I was being a temptress for someone never crossed my mind. But it was something that I always held on to moving forward because I never wanted anyone to think of me that way. And that was just really gross.
Yeah, and some articles we've read over the years show that the people who do the most counseling got the most problems with the issue. It isn't the bathing suit, in cases like this, the man who does the most criticizing has an issue with he's got an issue, all right, but there's just so many psychological factors to all of this, and personally, I got a personal opinion. I don't think the elder arrangement works. So, but one thing I found out when I was working on that article on in the Awake on respect for women, we did find. I won't go into it because I'm saving it for the future, but I am going to say we did find proof that, and it was in print. It was just that, and anything in a new magazine with a new thought or some controversial thought of a belief of the religion that might cause issues, you had to have the source of it. You couldn't invent something new without a committee meeting over it for the magazine, the teaching committee. So the women believe that, and they had certainly many of the husbands believe that they are the leader of the clan, the family of the household, and they have to take the final say on everything. And I found in an older issue of the magazine Watchtower, and it specifically said, because it was in an article that is policy, that the man only has headship on something to do with spiritual things, not everything. And so we put that in there, put the footnote where it's found. And first of all, if we couldn't say anything like that, because this was a big problem with the sisters, they were, and they also were being told at Bethel that all men were your heads. So if you worked in a job and it was the man was over the department, and you had to do it whatever they said. And when they were moody or bombastic or whatever, you had to put up. with it. So, so the society did. In fact, I was told, I said, we can't put it in there unless we have a source for this without a meeting with the committee. And we found the source. We said the governing body members who were critiquing, 3 of them would critique the issues first, and it wouldn't go through. And I remember Jack Barr, and when he first heard about it, he was astounded. And but then when he saw the source of it, he let it go through. But see, the men generally think that the society stands for this, and they don't. So I can. Some of the writers were mistaken over the years. The service department was mistaken over the years in policy, and they put together a lot of policy things affected relationships. And the circuit overseers got the information. And so, I'm fair about this. It just didn't work out this way because they got too involved in people's personal lives and made rules. And we see the results of the rules. Great unhappiness, some happy people with it, but overall it did not work. Your situation, your husband wasn't a reflection on Spanish. He was a reflection on his own opinions. And so you weren't even allowed to handle money. Right.
Well, I think that it would be fair. I feel like it's fair to say that he displayed some cultural tendencies toward machismo.
Okay. Yes. All right.
That
would be fair.
Any group of Spanish people, there may be some men who display those tendencies and some who don't. I don't think that what he displayed was taught or encouraged by the Jehovah's Witnesses, but it is allowed and tolerated and keeps.
So you said it right there. It was allowed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It was allowed.
And I was, as the woman, I mean, the abuse slowly, like I was allowed to have little jobs to support the pioneering work. But once I got pregnant, I stayed home with my children and I pioneered, and I loved that. I wanted that. But there were points when I wanted to have a little job, work at a little coffee shop or something to get out of the house, something to spice up my life a little bit. It was very depressing. I'm not a woman that is made to stay at home and cook and clean and watch children 24/7. That's just a very difficult thing for me to do. But I was not allowed to see anything with our finances. I'm actually very good with finances and numbers. And I was very concerned that my ex-husband didn't have a budget, that he didn't know what was going out and what was coming in. And it was very frustrating because sometimes I would need a haircut, maybe $15, $20. And he would say no, that we didn't have the money for it. And when I asked to see the finances, he said no. He was the one who was working, and I had to ask for anything that I needed for me and the kids through him until one assembly. In fact, this assembly was in July, 10 years ago, specifically. And I will tell you why I remember, because whatever information was shared at the assembly, I remember very delicately trying to talk with him and approach this subject. It was probably the 20th time I talked to him about it. He was very frustrated that I kept wanting to see our finances. And I shared the information from the assembly, and I said, based on what they shared, I would really like for you to let me see the finances. I would love to be a helper, and support you in this. And, this is my livelihood too. And I'm worried that things aren't okay financially, and it would help me feel better if you would show them to me. And so he threw everything at me. Here, have at it. See if you can figure it out. And I went through hundreds and hundreds of pages, and every single card that he had taken out, let me clarify that. One was taken out in my name. under the guise that he would pay it off every month. It was completely maxed out, and we had to file for bankruptcy. And I was distraught. I was 7 months pregnant with our second child. I personally hold integrity and honesty in paying my debts back very seriously. And that bankruptcy falls off of my credit score this November. So, the district convention happened. We had this conversation, and by November, we were filing for bankruptcy because there was no other options at that point. He had driven us in the ground, and I've had to reap consequences of that and survive as a single mother for all of these years with that weight held on me. And I remember going to the elders and saying, this is like federally wrong. You are not allowed to take out cards in people's names and rack up debt and have them go bankrupt for decisions I never even was allowed to be in. And the elders told me that I needed to be more submissive and more forgiving and read the Bible more and go out and service more.
And cook his favorite foods.
Yeah. I'm not a great cook.
Aha! We found a flaw here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not a great cleaner either. I'd rather.
Oh, goodness. It's distressing, but marriages break up all the time, and we can be realistic about it. Break up in the organization. We saw at Bethel, some of them. No, I mean, I don't want to say there was a lot of it, but there were men who ran off with other men's wives at Bethel. I mean, it's the human element here, but they don't want people to know that it's the human stuff, and they're always. It just doesn't work. I saw very unhappy women at Bethel. I saw very happy women at Bethel. I saw miserable men, and also the opposite. It just was 4,000 people all living together, and they did remarkably well under the circumstances. But who knew what went on behind closed doors? And those who were there the longest knew who had skeletons in their closet. And so, but in your situation, you were a victim of a lot of different dynamics of that was going on. And you could go to some sort of meeting with women in town, and you would have similar stories, right? So your marriage ended up in divorce, and but when we advertised that we were going to talk to you, the heading was about you survived. There was surviving your dad's suicide, right? And then a separation, and then there was disfellowshipping. Okay, you're welcome to talk about it or not, and you don't have to tell us private things. It just happens outside when some things don't work out and people do things they wish they hadn't have, or some people are glad they did it. They did do what they did. It's just people. You don't get punished. You did under the Pilgrims. Remember in school? You remember you learned all about the Pilgrims and when they came here to the Americas, and they set up their towns, and some women spoke up. They were branded as witches, or you wore the big A on your forehead for adultery, or this or that. Our world is not like that anymore. And if we make a mistake, my mother said to me, if you make a mistake, you are the one who's going to suffer. So, so I was always worried because I didn't like suffering. Because it's just the way it is. My mother's saying was, you make your bed, you sleep in it. And I asked her once before her death, because I never asked her all my years with her what that meant or where did it come from. And she said in Poland, when she was a little girl, you slept on, your bed was made out of straw. And so, of course, you had a linen over it because they spun their own linen or fabric. And so in the morning when you woke up, all the air was out and the straw was compressed. So when you got up in the morning, you shook it all out, because the straw was in a covering. And so you shook and you got air in there and it's nice and plump. And you came in from your chores. And as a kid, she had chores. As tiny as she was, she said, I had picked rocks out of the garden at 2 and 3 years old. Otherwise, we couldn't grow food. So she said, you're so exhausted after you eat supper, you fall into bed, you hit the floor because you didn't fluff up your bed in the morning. So how you make your bed, you sleep in it. And I thought that was very interesting. It had a lot of truth to it. So we all know when we make mistakes, they might not be illegal either. And there's a lot of things that used to be illegal are not illegal in our world today. People, if they make mistakes or sometimes they do something that's not a mistake, it actually is the best for them. But it appears to others that they should have done this or that. That's life. So you went back, you separated from your husband after your father died. How far different? Was that the same year or what?
So that's not quite how it happened. So it was March 28th, 2015. My ex-husband had gone off on me. He was triggered about something and he took it all out on me. And he said that he didn't want to be with me, which was something that he threatened a lot. At first, when he would threaten it, I would fall apart and feel like I would just beg him not to do that because I didn't want him to leave me. I knew that wasn't right for Jehovah. He used it in a very threatening way. So I wanted to get out of the marriage, but the times that I was in the marriage, he would threaten to leave, if that made sense. And so he had threatened to leave. And the past few times that he had done this, I had started creating budgets and looking at if we were to separate, he would always say, you'll never be able to survive without me. And so I wanted to kind of figure out, could I survive without him? And so this time on March 28th, he said, yeah, I want a separation. And I said, well, I'm tired of you threatening this and then never actually doing it, because I wanted him to want to separate. But, when you're a witness, you don't want to be the one who initiates the separating because then you look bad. You look less spiritual. And so he initiated it. And I said, I'm giving you 3 days to think about it. At the end of those 3 days, if you decide that you want to be separated, then that's it. I never come back, period. And if you decide that you don't want to be separated, then I don't want to be threatened with this as a control tactic for the rest of our marriage. Like, it's either or. And I came back and he said, I do want a separation. So I borrowed $1,500 from my mom. I got a little apartment for me and my children. They're now 9 and 11, but at the time they were 1.5 years and 3 years old. And I was a stay-at-home mom. So I got this little apartment and I remember it was barely furnished and it was the best place I ever lived. That's when I understood peace. Like, the vibration in my house was peaceful for the first time. And there was nothing that was ever going to take that away from me again. Yes. And I left because I saw my children seeing us. Yes. And I thought, oh my goodness, if I don't leave, they're going to think this is okay. Just like I always thought that this was okay. And I don't know what is okay, but I know that this is not okay. I didn't know what healthy looked like or felt like, but I knew that that wasn't it. And so for the following 7 days, I am applying for every type of aid, every type of job, waitressing jobs. That's all I felt like I really had experience doing, or that I'd be able to get quickly. And so during this frantic time, it was about 7 days after I left my ex-husband that the police knocked on my door and informed me that my father had died.
I
And
see.
at that point, I didn't know any context around it. I would soon learn that it was by suicide. And about a month later, I was disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witnesses. So when I was dropped into the world, I had no education, I had no job experience, I had no community. I'm going through a divorce and I'm grieving the suicide of my father. And it was in those moments that I truly understood why people do heroin and meth.
Yes.
I thought, this is the pain that they want to escape. And the only thing that saved me is that I did not want to put that pain on my children. So I was determined to take all of that pain and turn it into fuel that would protect my children in a
So
way
you-
that I was never
Yeah,
protected.
but you made a mistake. You go to the witnesses about it, and they disfellowship you, and that's life. And we moved ahead, and there are things you're sorry over, especially marrying the man that you married after 2 months of knowing him, because it didn't fit. The two of you were like oil and water, and so give us, because we've used our time up. Oh, this has been like a sitting in an office, and you have 10 people around, and everybody talks about their issues. What happens in that circumstance is people learn from each other. So we learned, even though we're not 10 people, but we got a few hundred listening, and they should learn from what we're saying. Maybe they're learning, if they're young enough, they're learning what not to do with their children, or what to do with their children. How much should they use the Bible as an application? How far should they go with rules and laws? Everybody's life is different, and they should make decisions based on their life and not on the requirements of a religion. And if they choose to do it, that's their business. But if it's a disaster, and this kind of thing eventually turned out to be a disaster, I can speak from experience. My life didn't turn out to be a disaster. I married a man we matched, and we still match. And we saw eye to eye on, even as we saw the progression of the organization as time went on, we saw eye to eye. It took a little while for him under certain circumstances, but always consider the circumstances, learn from other people. That's the goal. That older people, that all we can do is tell others. And you're doing that. You're young, and you're doing that. You're telling your experience so others don't make the same mistake. You want to be useful, right?
Absolutely.
This is a great way to be useful. It's just not to air your dirty linen or laundry, right? It's to help others.
Absolutely. And I mean, I would like to clarify around me being disfellowshipped. I have TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and I talk a lot about different things. And I haven't gone into great detail about why I was disfellowshipped yet. But here I would really like to address that quickly.
If you want to.
Because
you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I would like to.
Comfortable with it. If people can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my understanding, my timeline is that I leave my abusive ex-husband, my father dies by suicide, and the elders are pressuring me to get back with my abusive ex-husband. And I am convinced that if I get back with my abusive ex-husband, I am going to have the same fate as my father. I'm going to end up killing myself and putting this pain onto my children. So I make an arrangement with someone that I'm waiting tables with to.
I know what you're going to say. I don't know the circumstances, but I know what you're going to say.
And I just think it has to be talked about that, like, the only way out of a marriage is through adultery. And I ended up having sex with someone that I would not have had sex with otherwise, because I simply wanted to escape an abusive marriage. And I'm not the only woman that has done that. And that is sad.
Right. You made a very important announcement, because they do it to break the marriage. They think that's the only way. And if you still have a relationship with a deity or your creator, and you psychologically, how do you live with yourself? So you broke the arrangement and you believe that it's forgivable.
I hope so. I mean, I went to the elders immediately. I was absolutely destroyed. I'd never had sex with anyone besides my ex-husband in my life. So the whole experience was extremely traumatic. I called the elders at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday or Sunday, and I confessed everything and asked them, please, like, please make a judicial committee. Please don't disfellowship me. Like, I really don't want to be disfellowshipped. I feel so alone already going through divorce and my father's suicide. Like, please don't. And I had 3 meetings with them. The first one, I was begging them not to disfellowship me. And the second one, I was like, you know what? There's a lot of abusive situations happening in the witnesses, and I don't really like it. I don't like what y'all are tolerating. And then the third meeting was, I'm so sorry for all the things I said at the last meeting. Please don't disfellowship me. And they chose to disfellowship me anyways. And an announcement
where's
made.
the forgiveness and repentance? Where's it? What happened to all that?
I mean, they decided that I wasn't repentant enough.
Yeah, that's right. And why should they decide? Well, it's all behind you. All behind you. These are lessons to teach others, and don't. And anyway, it doesn't ruin your life. This type of thing. We were so had it beaten into us with the fear of disfellowshipping. If you did something wrong, then you felt guilty for the rest of your life. And how many witnesses went to their death? Oh, I wish I hadn't done that, because I hope I could get to live forever. It's always that way. I should say, no, I shouldn't say always. It is that way with many, okay, because it's not always that way. It's been a pleasure, absolutely a pleasure. I would love to sit in your living room and we could talk for days.
I would love that. Come to Virginia.
You never know who's going to show up, right? You're going to have I understand that, the results of others. I got an email. I sent out today to a few hundred people who are personal friends. Whenever I have articles or something special, I send them out to this group. They don't know each other. None of them know each other. I have a list. And so a woman wrote back to me, and she said, oh, I know her. I love her.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I wonder who that was.
I can tell you sometime. And she's an activist. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And but it was nice to get that. It was like a half an hour after I sent it. She always just go, oh, Shannon. Oh, she said, oh, I love Shannon. So you got people who care, and I'm sure that I'm not really sure of anything. I'm sure that Armageddon's not going to catch you and kill you. So because anything they've ever said about that, nothing happened. And it was interesting. Someone sent me a comment that Freddie Franz said while he was alive, and it was actually quoted it was in the literature, and that he said something I think that they've quoted it. It's going to be in the December 2023 Watchtower. Hit the quote of Freddie Franz. And it's mentioning, I just looked at this real fast because I got this a few hours ago. Someone wrote me and said, what do you think of this? It's in the new Watchtower. And he said about, no matter how long we have to wait for the new world. And he was such a believer. And he said, even if it takes 1,000,000 years, he said, even if it takes, he said, so the person who wrote said, what do you think about that? Him saying that, even if it takes 1,000,000, all these years, they said, oh, this is it. This is it. Peace and security, they say, peace and security, 1994. This is it. Now there's trouble right now in Israel. Oh, when Israel's involved, this is it. This is all. And Freddie Franz is their oracle. And he said, even if it takes 1,000,000 years, it's worth it. It's worth waiting for.
That just goes to show how deep the brainwashing is. That's so much of your life that you're willing to completely give up in hopes of something that may never come.
Yes. And if I may, I'm going to tell you what I learned when I was in France. And in France, in 2011, we were invited to Europe. And that's when I spoke at the Vatican. And I'm bragging about that because, listen, if you speak at the Vatican, it's special. And I got to speak at the Vatican. I don't really know why, except that I had that Dateline program. And it was Catholics who hated Jehovah's Witnesses who made the arrangements. So that tells you something. Anyway, so we went on to France, and they have the French government have for abuse, and they have a religious, all about bad religion. So I don't know how to put it. I don't speak French. And so I spoke to the people who are operating that. And one thing they did tell me, I mean, they didn't counsel me. They just were talking, and they don't use brainwashing. And ever since when I came back, I said, I'm never going to say brainwashing again. I'm going to tell everybody it doesn't fit. What fits is the words that they use. Mind manipulation. Isn't that perfect for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who were mind manipulated?
But, I do remember a governing body member. He was speaking at one of the assemblies or district conventions, and he said, people like to say that we brainwash people. Well, you know what? I want my brainwash. And I thought, then I was like, oh, yeah, me too. But now I look back and I think, wow. I do believe in brainwashing. I believe that we can manipulate our own beliefs. I think that we can have limiting beliefs, and I think that we can override and retrain our brains. But mind manipulation is not healthy, period. But like when it comes in this religious context.
That's the point. Yes, it's a system. It's mind manipulation, and everybody's mind is different. So how do you manipulate this one, that one, that one? Anyway, it was a pleasure, and we welcome you back if you got news or you want to add something. And we also would like to turn this program back over to Rick. So wherever he is, our time is up.
Thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate your time and your questions and the work that you're doing. It's so important, to anyone that's listening, if you're able to own your experiences and share them, even if it's not in a public way, it really helps others to understand the context of what it truly means to be a Jehovah's Witness.
That's right. You got it. You summed it up excellently. And that's the idea here, because I can come up with your words, and your words can mean much more to other people. That we come from entirely different circumstances, but so many people will identify with your circumstances and be helped by it. And the same with perhaps some people listen to me because of my circumstances are similar. So this is a great way for us to help each other. And Rick is making this possible. And we're very grateful for the time and the money that he has put into these things for us all to be able to help each other. So I just tell people to stay tuned. I've got other things coming on. I'm going to be talking about some things that they're going to really be interested in it from a different way. Yours is a personal experience that we learned from. But I got some things that Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be all affected by because nothing stays the same. And there's a lot of things going on in the world that's putting great pressure on religions like Jehovah's Witnesses. So we'll be talking about that.
Hey, Barbara, I just wanted to step in here. We do have some people, we can spend a few more minutes here. We do have some people who want to speak up and talk. They want to talk to Shannon. They got some questions. So does Shannon mind taking some questions? All right. All right, we got Angela on with us. Angela, go ahead. You're on with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rick. Hey, Shannon, I just wondered if you go to some sort of counseling to learn the techniques to override the brainwashing, or how did you, was it just a self-education that you did? What would you say to the rest of us who are needing to have that process done? Because that's a difficult one.
Yeah, that is a great question. As you know from my story, there was a lot of compounded trauma for years and years. And so I did see a lot of the consequences of that. And to work through and deconstruct the religious ideas was very overwhelming. So I immediately started seeing a counselor. And one of the first things that she taught me was boundaries. And we talked about assertiveness, and my mind was blown. She told me that I could set boundaries that I had never understood were even possible. So with counseling, and I looked into somatic healing, I also did a lot of brain rewiring in the form of identifying my self-limiting beliefs and then rewriting those over and over and over again. So for example, the witnesses told me that I would never survive without them, that I would never be blessed, that I would never prosper, I'd never have success, that I would never make it. And I would, I had really believed that deeply. So I had to unwrite those deep-seated beliefs. And my internal motivation during the entire process of healing myself, which is still ongoing, is that I want something better for my children. And in order to be better, I was surrounded by a lot of abusive people and a lot of narcissism. That means that I developed some of those tendencies myself, and I had to really sit with those parts and own them and work through them. And it is really, really hard. So if I could go into a kingdom hall and just shake everyone and say, you should leave, you should leave, you should leave, I would want to also include a warning that when you leave, it is one of the most traumatic things to deconstruct your religion and yourself and start identifying who you really are. Did that answer your question?
Yes. And then also too, how long do you think, how many years do you think you've been in counseling, would you say?
I've been in counseling on and off for the past 8 years. And I've done a lot of independent reading. So I've read books like The Body Keeps Score and How to Do the Work by Nicole LaPera. I've really been into healing my own trauma so that I don't get into a place where I want to commit suicide and leave that pain to my children.
Very good question. Very good question. And great answer.
Yeah, it's really great. And I just feel like the brain wants to go back to the same breath. And it's so easy for the brain to do that. So it's a very, if you have to stay on, I'll tell you what, you have to stay on it. It just tend to go back to that old thinking again. So I'm sure, everybody can relate to that. It's just not. Hi, Sharon.
Absolutely. That's very relatable.
Go ahead. We've got 213 on with us. Go ahead, 213.
Hey, how you doing, Rick? Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Shannon, I was wondering. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to hear about your dad. But I know a person that was committed suicide, and they disfellowshipped that person after he committed suicide. And I was wondering.
That's a new one. I never heard of such a thing. Go ahead. We want to hear all of this.
Yeah, they would disfellowship a person that they think they committed suicide. So I was just wondering, did you experience that with your dad?
No, there was never any talk. I do remember people feeling, there was always that concern, like if you died by suicide, would you be disfellowshipped? Would you be resurrected? How does that work? Everyone in our congregation was very empathetic and compassionate toward my father's death. He was loved by so many people. And even though he had his own trauma that he was working through that sometimes manifested at that time in his life as hurtful sarcasm, he really had a good heart. And it was devastating to so many people that knew him well, but didn't truly understand the battles that he was fighting.
Yeah. Many years ago, witnesses wouldn't even allow go to a funeral of a suicide, or we had a suicide here of a JW, and he was well known in the area because of his job, and the witnesses all went to the funeral. But years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So you see that the change there. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, in fact, Barbara and Shannon, I have to tell you that I haven't heard that. We've had people call into the 6 screens, and their relative who was a witness was disfellowship, and they actually did disfellowship them after they committed suicide. The strangest thing. So it has happened, but the witnesses, they do some pretty nasty things to people. Imagine the hurt that the family would feel.
From place to place. Some people, like Ephraim was saying when we talked here, and he would say from place to place that the elders had different rules. And so, I mean, this is in your personal life, and it affects you so greatly.
Okay, we've got 239. 239, come on with us. Looks like Florida. Go ahead, 239.
Yeah, hi, Barbara. I just want to say thanks. I want to say thanks, and I want to help out whatever way I can. And I'm sorry to hear about what happened to your dad. And I'm sorry to hear about your dad, and you're not alone. I can tell you that. I didn't know about other. I do have days where I wanted to end my own life, but thankfully not, because I thought my behavior was really bad. And it seemed like, talk to me about, what are your thoughts about what's going on with Australian World Commission and all the PSA and stuff?
Was that about, is there a question about what happened in Australia?
Or New Zealand now?
New Zealand. Well, to be quite frank, I'm just learning about a lot of these things. I was extremely ashamed to let anyone know that I was a Jehovah's Witness. I felt like everyone would think that I was dumb and naive. That's a big thing that I had to work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the biggest things I had to work with my counselor on. And I remember running a mid-sized law firm. I was in charge of HR, IT, financing, and marketing. And I just went and sat down to her and I said, I think I'm dumb. I think I'm just not smart. And that was a lot of the the conditioning of being ashamed of the things that I did believe. How could I be so stupid to believe something so ludicrous was my thought pattern. And so she had to work with me a lot on that. It's been recently that I've started to learn that there are countries like Norway and New Zealand and Australia who are actually holding witnesses accountable. I would love to see more of that.
There's more coming. There's they're taking second look at the witnesses all over Europe.
In Russia.
Russia. Well,
You already know about the ban in Russia. That's considered done and over with. That's as a branch office closure, if you want to say that. Russia knows about their bad behavior. That's why they got banned.
Shannon, how old were you when you got into the witnesses?
I was 3 when my parents came into the witnesses, and I was 26 when I left.
Yeah, I just think, when you're brought up into a religion, which basically, you're pretty close to born in, you didn't know anything before that. I just don't think that anyone should even think that it could be any different. The fact that they should have had their own critical thinking skills and all those kinds of things to be able to think for themselves, and that, how could they be so stupid? Because, and I know that the world will accuse you of that, saying, how could you be so naive? How could you believe that? But when you've been taught to not use your own mind and not use your own critical thinking skills and ask questions, you're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to think your own thoughts or have your own beliefs or argue in any way with their belief system, or you will be out of there. You learn how to not use your mind, because it will get you in a whole lot of trouble. Can you agree with me on that?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that my counselor worked with me on was really understanding that I was indoctrinated, I was controlled, who I was allowed to associate with, what information I was allowed to take in, and even the questions that I was allowed to meditate on. And so that helped me to see that I was definitely indoctrinated. I had no ability. Some people wake up when they're younger, and I kind of associate those people with being smarter, and that is not necessarily true. And what my counselor had me work on a lot was focusing on the fact that I did get out, that I was strong enough to leave, and focusing on the amount of strength that takes.
Oh, yeah.
Great advice. Great.
Well, that was a great interview, Barbara and Shannon. And we'll have to end it here so we can get to the news. But this will go down in the annals of Six Screens history. A lot of people want to listen to this one. You did a great job, Shannon. You have a lot of points.
Absolutely.
I'm sitting back here, Barbara, and Shannon has, I'm going to give her some really good remarks here, because I enjoyed the way she conducts herself. She has a lot of poise. She handles, she handles everything in a fine fashion. She's not rattled. And I bet you the elders were afraid of Shannon. I really mean it.
I think so too. Absolutely.
I think I gave them a good run for their money.
I believe you do, Shannon. No, you really do. You have a very good demeanor. You can carry yourself well. You're going to do fine in life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You really, really are. And thank you for coming on Ephraim's program a couple weeks
And
back.
Ephraim was right. It was good advice to have you here speaking English. And so we English folk can benefit.
Well,
okay, I will say goodbye. And thank you, Rick, for helping. And thank you so much, Shannon. And I hope for us that this is just a beginning of our friendship.
I would love that. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to everyone in the comments. I've been looking through them, and the outpouring of support and interest is really, it means a lot. So thank you.
See, I can't see those comments, so I'll have to go back on there to see what people.
I'm going to work with you, Barbara, and show you how to get those comments, because it's very interesting. I want you to do it. So by the time you come on next time, we'll get you to do it.
Well, I'll say good night, and thank you again for everybody to come and listen to us, and we hope very much you'll be back again, and maybe Shannon will be back, because she'll tell us experiences from henceforward. I mean, this is not the end. This is just a beginning of a very interesting life because you have all of this past to build on.
I would love to share what the healing process looks
Wouldn't
like.
that be wonderful? Yeah.
Yes.
We should help each other. All of us should be helping each other. We're all carrying the baggage. So we got to get rid of the baggage.
All right, we're going to end it right there. Thank you very much, both of you guys. Keep standing
Thank
tall.
you.
And don't you ever give
Thank
up,
you, guys.
in or out. And never let your visions die, Shannon. You're a fine young lady. Don't you ever change. Bye now.
Bye.
All right. We're going to end the stream right here. We're going to go to JW World News. That's coming up next. Right here on the 6 Screens Tele-Network. There's nowhere else to go, friends. This is where former Jehovah's Witnesses, this is where active Jehovah's Witnesses, this is where they come to talk every Saturday night. And we're so glad that we can do the program. We've been doing it now for 18 years. Never missed a Saturday night. We are here because you are here. We're going to end this stream. JW World News coming up next, right here on the 6 Screens Tele-Network.